Across various media, the beta male is a character archetype that's typically portrayed as a submissive, lesser man, heavily contrasting what society typically expects of the male gender. Whenever these characters are present, they are more or less meant to be laughed at by the audience because of their lack of perceived masculinity. We see these characters and we think that they're pathetic and weak, and we think that's funny because they subvert our expectations of what a man should truly be like. And this isn't just us, the viewers, it's usually the other characters around the beta male character also taking their respective shots at him. They either poke fun at him or just straight up treat him like a punching bag. But my question is there more to this character trope than what meets the eye? So in this video, we'll be taking a closer look at this popular writing trope across different media and genres and how this character trope has evolved over time, so please be aware of spoilers, particularly for the following shows. And with that out of the way, let's proceed with the video. Now, one of the most interesting things about the beta male character trope is that unlike other character archetypes, the beta male usually does not stand on its own. In practically any piece of media that a beta male character is present in, there will almost always be a character that directly contrasts him, a foil if you will. And it's usually one of two, the alpha male or the alpha female. And we'll talk more about this dynamic later, but I want you to think about other popular character tropes in media. For example, the beer dad or the child genius. Sometimes, yes, they exist to parallel another character on a show, but we have seen that these character archetypes are strong and interesting enough to be able to carry their own show as the lead. Now, going back to what I said earlier, usually the beta male is paired with an alpha character of some sort. An alpha is typically characterized as dominant, aggressive, and assertive of their will and desires. They are characters who take charge and control of what happens around them, and men are typically expected to be alphas, as dominant men are seen as better men in society. In fact, before the concept of the alpha male was co-opted by, let's say, weird internet subcultures, being an alpha male was something heralded as the true epitome of masculinity. And in media, the beta male character has almost always needed an alpha. Examples include Cyril Figgis and Sterling Archer from Archer, Milhouse Found Houghton and Bart Simpson from The Simpsons, and Charles Boyle and Jake Peralta from Brooklyn Nine-Nine. It's the classic alpha hero and beta sidekick dynamic that can be seen all the way back with classic literature in Sherlock Holmes and Watson. And fun fact, you might think that this dynamic is something derived directly from nature, but while alpha males do exist in certain primates, it's kind of weird. For the longest time though, people have believed that the wolves have an alpha structure, and the term alpha wolf caught on. But it turns out the concept of the alpha wolf is actually based on a bogus study, and the scientist behind it has been trying to correct his mistakes ever since. And while chimps do have a patriarchal social structure and are linked closely to humans, people are actually closer relatives to bonobos, who have a matriarchal social structure. And speaking of, in media, if the beta male isn't paired with an alpha male, they're typically paired with an alpha female, a female character who is dominant and assertive and all that. This is the subversion of the expected male-female dynamic and almost always a romantic pairing, but there are exceptions. For sitcom examples, there's Phil and Claire Dunphy from Modern Family, Leonard and Penny from The Big Bang Theory, and this dynamic is also present in children's media, Richard and Nicole Watterson from The Amazing World of Gumball,
Step back! She's gonna severely reprimand him!
and Jimmy and Sarah from Ed, Ed and Eddie. The last one is not a romantic pairing as they are just best friends, but in all of these duos, the woman is more dominant and assertive than the male. And while you might think that this trope of having a strong woman and a weak man being paired together is a character dynamic that's only pervasive in modern media, this trope has actually existed for centuries, with the best example I can think of being Macbeth and Lady Macbeth in the classic Shakespearean play. Remember that in the earlier acts of the play, the titular Macbeth is most definitely a beta male. At first, Macbeth is afraid to take matters into his own hands and commit regicide by murdering King Duncan to ascend the throne. It is only when Lady Macbeth pushes him and asserts her lust for power onto him that he does, and he wouldn't do it himself because he is, according to her, too full of the milk of human kindness. And even after that, Macbeth spirals into guilt and paranoia, a soldier, general even, going crazy after killing someone else. Meanwhile, from Lady Macbeth's very first scene, we already know that she's not your typical matriarch. She delivers a soliloquy where she calls on the spirits to unsex her, which in the context of the play means for her to shed the expectations of femininity and the female gender. She wants power, but being a woman in olden times means she can only achieve power through manipulating her husband Macbeth. Thus, she advocates for bloody murder and pushes him into killing the old King Duncan. But remember that the story of Macbeth is a cautionary tale, and it's more than just about letting your ambition get to your head, because gender plays a huge role in Macbeth as well. Keep in mind that during the time of Shakespeare, gender roles were a lot more rigid than they are now. Women were viewed as second-class citizens. They weren't allowed to have traditional jobs or strong opinions. They weren't even allowed to be in Shakespeare's plays, so female characters were played by men. And at the end of the play, we see the deaths of both Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, sending an implicit message to the audience that this is what happens when you don't stick to your gender roles. But we've moved past this kind of thinking as a society, or at least, I hope so. Women no longer have to conform to the traditional idea of how a woman is supposed to act, and I think that's great. Now, we have a wealth of fleshed out female characters that are both conformist and non-conformist when it comes to traditional gender roles. But going back to the beta male, it feels like this character trope got the short end of the stick when it comes to the dynamic. While the strong, dominant, assertive female character has become a lot more accepted and celebrated, the submissive male has become much more maligned. And this is interesting because the beta male characters have always been portrayed as the have-nots of their respective shows. These are the characters that you do not want to be. They are written as pathetic, and their weaknesses are often played for laughs, and they're treated like punching bags, not just in universe, but by the writers and the audience as well. In Family Guy and The Simpsons, there are Mort Goldman and Milhouse Van Houten.
Yeah, you know what, Mort? Shut up! Alright, just shut the fuck up!
Both of these characters are constantly bullied in their respective shows and getting picked on as easy targets, especially Milhouse. There's even a beta male in the Game of Thrones show, Edmure Tully. One of his first memorable scenes is him trying to ignite his father's funeral pyre, but he keeps missing shots only for his uncle to have to step in and hit the arrow for him. And in the finale, he legitimately tries to claim the throne, but all the other characters just cringe, stare at him, and Sansa even tells him to cut the crap and sit back down. But I think the poster child for the beta male in modern media has to go to Jerry Smith from Rick and Morty. Despite being the Smith family patriarch, the character is constantly treated as a joke, not only by Rick, his father-in-law, but the rest of the family as well. We see that throughout the series, many of his actions are driven by insecurity, and the show frequently puts him in emasculating situations.
I've been getting into beekeeping lately. Is something wrong with that? What's wrong with that? Don't I have the right to be happy? To exist?
And on more than one occasion, he is disrespected by his own children.
Oh, you think this s'more makes you special? What, because someone said good job to you once when you were 10? That's actually really sad, Dad. Let's be real, you've been high-roading us nonstop, forcing us to do nothing in the middle of fucking nowhere because it's the only way you're gonna level the playing field, isn't it? Because if you move the bar so low, you might actually seem like you're worth a fuck.
And I think there's a pretty clear reason for why characters like Jerry Smith exist the way they do. We as a society do not and should not celebrate weak men. And the beta male trope is both a reflection of this truth and a cautionary example of what a person might become if they lack the traits of a traditional man. But the world has changed since this trope was first perpetuated. Strength and weakness can now be portrayed in different ways, but the importance of traditional masculine values remains the same, and some would argue they're more important than ever. Thus, in media, there is a new derivative of the beta male that both reflects a changing world while also retaining the spirit of traditional masculinity. It's the character trope that I would simply call the non-traditional male. These are characters that retain the core values of the traditional man, but also adding a healthy dose of modern perspective. One example of this non-traditional male character trope is Phil Dunphy from Modern Family. Unlike the traditional TV dad, Phil isn't the man of the house. The term comes with many connotations, that they're supposed to be decisive, assertive, and strong. Think Tim Taylor from Home Improvement and Carl Winslow from Family Matters. And while he is the Dunphy family patriarch, the title of man of the house and the responsibilities that come with it are undoubtedly deferred to his wife, the controlling, uptight, but still very much lovable Claire Dunphy. But while Phil isn't assertive like your old school TV dad, he's shown to be healthy in a different way. He's emotionally open with his children, which allows them to connect with him easier than they can with Claire, and he also has his hobbies that aren't traditionally masculine either. For example, he's into magic, which is usually seen as a childish thing more than anything else, and power walking, which is typically associated with women.
We are women and we are free. We're bringing an end to the patriarchy. We are women. Hear our pain. We are women. Hear our shout. We are women. Have no doubt. We are women. We are free. We are
Shut the fuck up!
But Phil is confident in his masculinity, and while he does like to seek approval from Jay, who is the more traditionally masculine character between the two, when it comes to what matters most, which is protecting his family and providing for them, we see that Phil is just as good as a man can be.
Give me the ticket for the car.
Phil?
No, I'm going after her. This little chicken game may work for your dad, but it doesn't work for me. That's my little girl. I need her to know that no guy on earth is good enough for her, let alone some slimy middle-aged jean salesman.
Another example would be Chidi Anagonye from The Good Place. Chidi, as a character, would seem like the typical beta male trope. He's anxious and indecisive. In fact, his death is an indirect consequence of his overthinking. But unlike Jerry and his Jerryness, Chidi's indecisiveness isn't his defining trait. It's explicitly a character flaw that he works on throughout the series, and by the finale, he becomes confident and self-assured in his morality. This shows that his indecisiveness or beta-ness isn't what defines him, but rather his moral idealism. Throughout the series, Chidi is a character that wants to do the right thing and will fight for and uphold his ideals, even when it's hard to tell what the right thing to do is. Thus, his indecisiveness is a direct result of his pursuit of being morally good. While yes, his indecisiveness is a problem, that's not all there is to Chidi at all. He is intelligent, educated, hardworking, and all around a good-natured individual. You might watch season 1 and think that he's just a beta male character, but Chidi is so much more than that. And the last character that I want to talk about in this section is one that's older than both of the previous examples, and that's ironic because it's Bobby Hill in King of the Hill. Bobby is a very well-written subversion of the beta male trope. While you might initially see a fat kid who's unathletic and has weird hobbies, Bobby actually exhibits his very own brand of masculinity. Bobby accepts the way he is, that he's fat and not athletic like the other boys at school. And despite his dad pushing him to be a more traditionally masculine male, and his own father's assertion that that boy ain't right, Bobby can find ways to get what he wants without having to conform to traditionally masculine methods. My favorite example of this is in Season 6, Episode 1, Bobby Goes Nuts. In this episode, Bobby goes to a women's self-defense class, during which he learns the time-tested and reliable maneuver of kicking a male combatant in the balls. And then we see that throughout the episode, he uses this technique to stand up to bullies, protecting himself and even other kids when they're getting picked on.
That's my purse!
Bobby finds empowerment in his nutcracking, and the bullies stop picking on him, but he also uses it to help other kids who are bullied too. But Hank, Bobby's father, is worried about this because he fears that Bobby isn't learning to fight properly. See, low blows, while effective, aren't seen as honorable, and Hank seems to think that honorable fighting is the right and only way to fight, but this knightly way of thinking is outdated. Bullies don't fight fair. Muggers don't fight fair. Honor is such a silly thing to consider when you're face to face with a guy with a knife who's asking for your wallet. So Hank tries to teach Bobby how to box, but Bobby rejects Hank's teachings and kicks his own father in the balls, flooring him, showing how effective his technique is and how confident the boy is in his own ability without having to conform to others. And we've also been shown that time and time again, Bobby's self-confidence and ability to embrace his imperfections is kind of his own superpower.
Mom, I'm fat, but big deal. I don't feel bad about it. You never made me feel bad about it. And just because there are some people in the world who want me to feel bad about it, doesn't mean I have to.
He's confident, emotionally intelligent, and doesn't care what other people think. This ironically gives him a level of emotional maturity that other characters in the show like Hank and Peggy simply don't have. And it's important to note that all of these characters exhibit traits that are typically associated with a beta male trope. Phil doesn't call the shots in his household, Chidi is indecisive, and Bobby isn't interested in traditional guy stuff. But even then, all of these characters still exhibit traits associated with masculinity. Phil is beloved by his family, Chidi is willing to stand up for what's right, and Bobby is confident in his own identity. All of these characters exhibit masculinity, but not in the traditional way, but they also all get the girl. See, another trait that is typically linked with a beta male is that they're incompetent when it comes to attracting women. This comes from the quite frankly outdated idea that women are only attracted to dominant men who are alphas, and that anything other than that, women as a general whole, will just not view as attractive. But Phil Dunphy has a loving relationship relationship with Claire, and sexually they're also quite compatible and active with each other. And despite the circumstances surrounding their initial meeting, Eleanor eventually falls for Chidi and they fall in love with each other over and over again. And while we have shown that Bobby does have his struggles with women, like many young men his age, he's also been able to pull, at least on occasion. These characters are subversions of the typical beta male trope through their nuanced characterization and writing, and not to mention great portrayals from their respective actors and voice actors. But this isn't the only way the beta male trope has been subverted in media, because ultimately all of these characters are heroic. We cheer for them because they're the main characters and we want to see them succeed, but beta males have also been used as villains. See, one of the traits that beta males have is that people are quick to write them off as nothing more than betas. They're not real threats, or maybe they're easy to trust, and that's where the danger is. Because they're not perceived as threatening figures, they're able to weaponize their public perception and chase success from the shadows. A great example is Peter Baelish, aka Littlefinger from Game of Thrones. He starts off the series as a minor lord, holding land in Westeros that's of very little value. It's also been shown that he's also not the most capable warrior, so him trying to achieve prestige through victory in battle, like other characters such as Robert Baratheon and Ned Stark, is simply off the table for him. But through his scheming, plotting, backstabbing, and intelligent marriages, he is able to ascend to some of the most powerful positions in the realm. Game of Thrones is set in a world that values men and might and old school masculinity, but Littlefinger's ability to use his image as a lesser man to ascend to positions of power from nothing are what make him such a brilliant subversion of the typical beta. And characters like Phil, Chidi, Bobby, and Littlefinger are all great examples of how the beta male trope has evolved past emasculated male punching bags. But that isn't to say that Phil Dunphy is a better character than Jerry Smith. I believe that a character works when they fit into the context of their show. Phil Dunphy works because the goal of Modern Family is to portray, well, a modern family. And it makes sense to have the submissive dad / controlling mom dynamic portrayed on screen, because that is a completely valid way to run a household in modern times. Also, Jay is the traditional dad, and it wouldn't make sense to write two trad dad characters on the same show. But Jerry Smith also works because he's a foil to Rick, especially for Beth. Yes, he is pathetic, weak, and helpless, and has very little redeeming qualities, if any. But he exists to contrast Rick and his immense power levels. But even with all of that power, Rick was still an absent father to Beth, and Jerry, despite his Jerryness, is immensely loyal to his wife. Both of these characters work because before anything else, they fit in the context of their respective shows, and I think both the classic beta male trope and its offshoot, the non-traditional male trope, still have a place in modern media. The non-trad male character is a perfectly valid example of healthy, modern masculinity. They still exhibit the traits commonly associated with good men. They exhibit strength, moral virtue, and self-confidence, but they do it in their own way, without having to conform to traditional standards. That's perfectly fine and valid, but it's important to remember that the non-trad male character is a reinterpretation of traditionally masculine values, recontextualizing them to fit the world today. But the beta male exists and has always existed as an outright rejection of those traditional values, rather than a reinterpretation. When you lack strength of character, you become weak and unable to protect others nor yourself. When you reject moral virtue, you become a snake who can't be trusted by their friends, and when you replace self-assurance with external validation, you will never be your own man. And that is the true purpose of the beta male trope. And if you like this video, be sure to leave a like and comment your thoughts down below. Subscribe for more content just like this video, and I'll see you in the next one.